The clock struck midnight, its chime echoing hollowly through the empty house. Jane's trembling hands clutched the banister as she descended the creaking staircase, each step resonating like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. She didn't know why she was awake. Something, a faint whisper, or perhaps the cold touch of an unseen hand, had dragged her from her restless sleep. And now, standing in the dimly lit hallway, she realized she wasn't alone. A shadow moved beneath the stairs. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. The shadow shifted again, elongating unnaturally, as though it were stretching itself to fit the cramped space. She stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat as a pair of glowing eyes blinked open within the darkness. "Leave this place," a voice rasped, low and guttural, vibrating through the very walls of the house. Jane screamed, her back hitting the doorframe as she scrambled to put distance between herself and whatever was under the stairs. Her phone, abandoned on the kitchen counter, buzzed faintly, a single notification lighting up the screen. But she couldn't tear her eyes away from the shifting shadow. "I'm not afraid of you," she stammered, though her legs felt like jelly and her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the flashlight she'd grabbed instinctively. The thing under the stairs laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound, like someone choking on water. Slowly, it began to emerge. A skeletal hand, its bony fingers tipped with cracked, yellowed nails, reached out first, clutching the edge of the staircase. Then came the head, a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and shadow, its features shifting as though it couldn't decide what face to wear. Jane bolted for the kitchen, her mind screaming at her to get out of the house. She grabbed her phone and dialed the first number that came to mind. "Hello? Jane?" It was Peter, her best friend. His voice sounded groggy. "Peter, it's here. There's something in my house," she cried, her voice cracking. "What are you talking about? Are you hurt? Where are you?" "Under the stairs, it's under the stairs," she gasped, glancing over her shoulder. The hallway was empty, but the air felt heavier, as though the house itself were breathing. "Stay on the line, I'm coming over," Peter said, his tone shifting from confusion to urgency. "Hurry," she whispered. "Please hurry." The line went dead. Jane stared at her phone, panic rising. "Peter, are you there? Peter?" No response. The wind outside howled as Jane sat huddled in the kitchen, clutching a knife she'd pulled from the drawer. Minutes felt like hours, and the silence stretched thin, taut, like a wire ready to snap. She jumped at every creak, every groan of the old house. But the shadow didn't return. A loud bang shattered the silence. Jane screamed, dropping the knife. It came from the front door. "Jane, it's me, open up," Peter's voice called. She ran to the door, fumbling with the locks before yanking it open. Peter stood there, his face pale and worried, holding a flashlight and a crowbar. "Thank God," she breathed, pulling him inside. "It's here, it's in the house." Peter scanned the hallway, his grip tightening on the crowbar. "What did you see?" "A shadow. It spoke to me. And then it tried to..." She trailed off, unable to put the horror into words. Lee said, "All right, let's check it out," Peter said, his tone steady, but his eyes betraying his unease. "No, we have to leave, right now," Jane insisted. "Jane, listen, if something's in here, we need to deal with it. What if it follows you?" She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Together they moved through the house, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air grew colder as they approached the staircase. Peter crouched down, shining the light into the space beneath the stairs. "I don't see anything. Are you sure?" "Oh, I can see it. There's enough of a pattern there to be sure I can see it." A hand shot out from the darkness, grabbing his wrist, He yelped, dropping the flashlight as Jane screamed. The shadow lunged forward, knocking Peter onto his back. Its form was more solid now, a nightmarish figure of sinew and shadow. Peter swung the crowbar wildly, striking it once, twice, but it didn't flinch. "Run, Jane," he shouted, struggling against the creature. "I'm not leaving you," she cried, grabbing the flashlight and shining it directly at the thing. It hissed, recoiling slightly, its form flickering like static on a broken television. Peter used the moment to roll away, scrambling to his feet. "The light! It's afraid of the light," he panted. The creature let out a deafening screech, retreating back into the shadows. The house shook, the walls groaning as though under immense pressure. A crack snaked its way across the ceiling, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the halls. "We need to go, now." Peter grabbed Jane's arm, pulling her toward the door. They burst outside into the frigid night, slamming the door behind them. "Padlocked," he answered. Hours later, they sat in Peter's car, parked a safe distance from the house. Jane's hands were still shaking as she sipped the coffee Peter had handed her. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, staring at the house. "I don't know," Jane whispered. "But it's not just the house. It felt like it was in me, watching me." Peter frowned. "We need help. Someone who knows about this kind of thing." Jane nodded, her eyes never leaving the house. She could still feel it, the cold, oppressive presence, the way it had whispered her name. And she knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. The following morning brought no relief. Jane hadn't slept, and Peter, slumped in the driver's seat, barely managed an hour before jolting awake, muttering about shadows. The sunrise painted the house in soft amber hues, but it did nothing to diminish the oppressive aura surrounding it. Even from the car, the building seemed alive, watching, waiting. "We can't just leave it like this," Peter said, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse, the resolve in it faltering. "If that thing's still in there, someone else could get hurt." Jane shivered. "What are we supposed to do? Call the police? Tell them my house is haunted?" Her voice cracked, and she pressed her hands to her temples. "We need help, Peter. Real help." Peter hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "There's this guy. He runs a paranormal investigation group. It's probably a scam, but he's got a ton of videos online. Claims he's dealt with stuff like this before." Jane gave him a skeptical look, but didn't argue. "Call him." It took 3 tries before someone answered. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and oddly reassuring. "This is Alex Renfield, paranormal consultant. How can I assist you?" Peter quickly explained the situation, omitting none of the horrifying details. Jane winced at the way it all sounded, insane, like the ramblings of someone desperate for attention. But Alex didn't laugh or question. "I'll be there in 2 hours, Alex said. "Do not re-enter the house. Whatever this entity is, you've already provoked it. Stay together, and if anything strange happens, call me immediately." "Huh?" The line went dead, leaving Jane and Peter to wait in tense silence. Every passing minute felt heavier, the air around them thick with anticipation. Finally, a black SUV pulled up behind their car, and a tall man with sharp features and piercing gray eyes stepped out. He wore a long coat and carried a bag slung over his shoulder. "You're Jane?" he asked, his gaze locking onto her. She nodded. "And you're Peter?" His eyes flicked to Peter. "Good. Let's get to work." Alex wasted no time. He pulled out a small device that began clicking softly as he approached the house. "Electromagnetic activity is off the charts," he muttered. "And this pressure, it's ancient, malevolent." "You can feel it too?" Jane asked, her voice trembling. Alex nodded. "It's like a predator marking its territory. Whatever's in there, it's powerful, and it doesn't want to leave." "Lakashkana." They followed Alex to the trunk of his SUV, where he unpacked several items: cameras, sensors, and what looked like a strange assortment of relics. Candles, a mirror framed in silver, and a small vial of dark liquid. "This isn't just some random haunting," Alex said as he worked. "You've got a genuine entity here, a shadow wraith by the feel of it. They're rare, but nasty. They feed on fear, thrive in darkness, and attach themselves to places or people." Jane froze. "People?" Alex glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "It's possible. You said you felt like it was watching you? Like it was inside you?" She was right. She nodded slowly, dread sinking in. "Then it's not just your house. It's latched onto you, and unless we sever that connection, it won't stop." The weight of his words hit Jane like a physical blow. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We confront it, drive it out." Alex's tone was firm, confident. "But you need to understand, this will not be easy. It will fight back." Jane swallowed hard, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the car door. "I'll do whatever it takes." She moved to hold the door wide for Michael and Jane, but they jerked. Inside the house, the air was colder than before, heavy with the unmistakable stench of decay. Alex set up his equipment with practiced precision, lighting the candles and arranging them in a protective circle in the living room. He handed Jane the mirror and gestured for her to sit in the center of the circle. "The mirror is a conduit," he explained. "The wraith will reveal itself through it. Whatever happens, do not break the circle. Do not look away." "What about you?" Peter asked, clutching the crowbar again. "I'll be monitoring the energy levels, and if it tries to lash out, I'll make sure it doesn't reach her." Jane's heart raced as she stared into the mirror. At first, there was nothing but her pale reflection, her wide eyes framed by the flickering candlelight. But then, slowly, the glass began to darken, the shadows coalescing into a shape. "Jane!" The voice was barely a whisper, but it sent chills down her spine. The reflection in the mirror wasn't hers anymore. It was the creature. Its glowing eyes bore into her, and its shifting, grotesque form seemed to pulse with malice. "Stay focused," Alex barked. "It's trying to scare you. Don't let it in." The shadow in the mirror smiled, a ghastly, unnatural expression. "You can't escape me, Jane. I'm a part of you now." Jane clenched her fists, her voice trembling but firm. "You're not welcome here. Leave me alone." The room shook violently, the candles flickering as the wraith's laughter filled the air. It surged forward, slamming against the invisible barrier of the circle. The pressure was overwhelming, suffocating. "Hold on, Jane," Alex shouted, chanting in a language she didn't recognize. The silver mirror in her hands grew warm, almost burning, as the wraith writhed and screeched. "They aren't supermen." Suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light. The mirror shattered, the pieces scattering across the floor. The wraith let out a final, deafening scream before vanishing into thin air. The house fell silent. Jane collapsed, gasping for air as Peter rushed to her side. "Jane, are you okay?" She nodded weakly, her whole body trembling. Alex knelt beside her, his face grim but relieved. "It's gone," he said. "At least for now. But you'll need protection. These things don't give up easily." Jane looked up at him, her resolve hardening. "What do I need to do?" Alex smiled faintly. "We'll prepare you. But first, let's get out of here. This place needs to be sealed." As they left the house, Jane glanced back one last time. The oppressive presence was gone, but she knew Alex was right. This wasn't over, not by a long shot.